Give ear, O ye pilgrims trudging through this vale of tears. Behold Once for All Delivered, a podcast wherein the pure streams of Reformed theology and the crooked paths of this earthly culture be searched out. Three godly servants, Caleb Castro, Andrew Smith, and Stephen Evertsey, do wield the sword of truth, expounding that faith once for all delivered unto the saints.
Okay. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, to Once for All Delivered. I am Andrew Smith. I am joined by my usual co-hosts who can introduce themselves.
Can we?
They can, but will they?
That was my co-host, Caleb Castro.
And that was my co-host, Stephen Evertsey.
They actually are in the same place together when we record remotely like this, so they can have like good synergy, and I'm just the odd man out here, even more than usual. But anyway, we are here tonight. We are recording this on a Friday night in December. We had no plans to record any episodes during December, and then things happened. Things related to other things that we have talked about on this show before. Just over 2 years ago, we were doing live stream video episodes back when we were trying to be cool like the youths. And we did an episode called They Tried That in a Small Town, and it was about the spread of liberal and progressive and godless ideologies in rural America. We talked about various aspects of that, schools, even colleges, universities. And one aspect that came up in that was public libraries. Public libraries and public librarians are often a vehicle by which these ideologies are spread, even in areas in deep red states where we would expect to find conservative and Christian values. Now, why are we coming back to this on a Friday night in December? Well, something has happened, something that hits close to home for my two co-hosts, and so we decided that it was worth returning to this subject and talking about the particulars of their situation and how we as Christians might want to think and act in light of situations like this. So, Stephen, Caleb, what's been going on over there in Iowa?
Yeah, you can look this information up now. A couple different media outlets have covered it. I believe the primary one to break the news was the Iowa Standard. And then there was a radio show host, and now the Northwest Iowa Reviews picked it up as well. It's kind of been getting a lot of attention here, but basically the summary of it is the timeline. You guys can go check and fact check all these different things, and we'll link some things in show notes. That way we make sure you get the right information. But going off some memory here, I've listened to a couple different interviews. I've read a couple different things. Recently in one of our libraries, a couple months back, a 13-year-old girl was dropped off at the library. And she went into the library, and she apparently was looking for a specific book. I don't know why she was looking for this one. Maybe friends or something told her about it or read online. I don't really know those details. That's just speculation. But she couldn't find it, and so she asked a librarian for help. And one of the library help brought her to the book. It is a book that is posted in the adult section. She's 13 years old. The book is called Icebreaker. It is a romance novel. And the Iowa Standard's Jacob Hall gave us the displeasure of reading through it in one of his videos, which, to be fair, for those who are unwilling to actually investigate what the content is, that could be helpful. But basically a book of extremely vulgar and crass sexual depictions. Romance is a horrible way to describe this. It's smut. It's pornography. And so that was the incident that then led to what had the parents file for a challenge of the book a couple months back again yet. And there were some various meetings that went on. And so what happened was at the November or December, I'm not quite sure about that. I think their November meeting got pushed back to December or something like that. Anyways, it was right around the turn of the month. The parents came in to express their desire to have the book censored or removed, as in put up parental controls. And if you can't do that, get rid of the book. And they laid out a bunch of, try this, try that, try the other thing. And so then the board put to a vote whether or not to keep this book. And they voted 8-1 to keep a book that is erotic pornography and currently is still accessible to anybody who would like to check it out. They have directed their director to look into doing policy, how they might protect future patrons, but they did not vote to remove it. There's other details around this. They had a statement that basically said, they we can get into some of those things here a little bit too. But yeah, that's basically the situation. A young girl checked out a book that really nobody should be reading, and the
just so
library
we're
has decided
clear,
to keep it.
when you say that the book remains available, that includes being available to any children or adolescents who wish to check it out, correct?
Definitely for now, because they haven't put any policy into effect yet.
Okay. Caleb, did you have any additional details you would like to add to the facts of the case here?
No, not in particular. I think Stefan has kind of given the gist of it. And this is, my wife heard some of the quotes from the book, and that was actually read out. So those quotes were read out by by the father that was submitting the complaint at the board meeting. I mean, he made the point in saying, like, if I read this like out in the open, like this is something that would basically people would, like, arrest me for. Like this is the kind of level where it's just it's in no way it's in no way something that should even be regarded as a literature. We'll get into this in a bit more, but like, on that point, the library has defended itself and basically saying that it's committed to upholding, the standards of distributing literature and information to the community. But you got to beg the question: should all information be distributed? If libraries are committed to learning, like, what is the actual like benefit, even like perceived or conceived? What is the benefit of reading pure smut?
Well, and the father actually had pointed out that I believe he said it was the Iowa. I believe in Iowa, they have determined that it is illegal for parents to distribute vulgar material to their children, except there's a clause that basically gets libraries off the hook. But the clause says that it must be for educational purposes. And he says, how is this educational? He said he was a educator for years, and he even had to teach natural science or something and talk about like reproductive stuff with animals. And he said, I never had to say anything so disgusting and vulgar as is written in these books. He said, how is this educational? He had a very good point at that.
And so what kind of, because there's been these meetings and other such issues, what kinds of reasoning and defenses has the librarians and or the trustees of the library been giving for keeping this material available?
Sioux Center Public Library provided an update and gave a press release. They basically said they're examining relevant laws. They voted to keep the title, and really it's a list that says, look, we believe in the freedom to read, which is an ALA thing. We can get back to that. We believe in the Library Bill of Rights, which is, again, as an ALA thing. We'll
the American
well.
Library Association.
But they basically, there was no remorse. We're sorry that a young child was able to see something vulgar and inappropriate. They basically said, look, we want to have clear communication. We respect a wide range of perspectives. We would like to strengthen resources for parents and guardians. We want to give you guys control. And then they also want to say they want to uphold the policies and laws that govern public libraries. Well, some of this is the problem where they're trying to hide behind litigation. But we recently had Rep. Schuyler Wheeler said there's nothing that needs to be changed in the law. It's that the people simply need to make different decisions on the board.
Yeah. When we had our foray into libraries a couple years ago, I think we briefly touched on the American Library Association. So they are essentially the Guild of Public Librarians. They are more or less, if you have a public librarian, there's a good chance they're a member of the ALA. And they are one of the most radically progressive advocacy organizations in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
They are, if you ever hear any of the talk in recent years about banned books, which is basically false. It's basically propaganda. They say, oh, books are being banned in cases like this. The ALA is driving a lot of that discourse and a lot of that rhetoric. They basically say that if you want to remove even any indecent material, that is somehow a violation of rights and liberties. And again, all from a radically progressive perspective. It is no accident that the ALA is like this. And I'm not going to say that every librarian is, but there is a decent chance that if you have a public library, they're probably somehow influenced by this. The ALA goes to great lengths to press these policies and these advocacy positions like this freedom to read statement and other such things.
Well,
and many libraries just sort of adopt them sight unseen.
Right. The one board member who did not go along with the other 8 did an interview with Jacob Hall, and I believe we'll link to that. But she basically said much of the policies at the Sioux Center Library are near verbatim with the ALA, and they follow much of their direction. And in fact, she said that the board orientation packet says that members must have firm support for the ALA's freedom to read statement and Library Bill of Rights. So they are taking their direction from the ALA.
Yeah, both of these, by the way, are merely advisory documents put out by the ALA. They carry no force of law or policy unless a library's governing body or any legislative body adopts them as such. And that was,
I think that's an important point to note, in that when we're looking at this with ALA or these various statements or principles and policies from, freedom to read, or what you cited a moment ago, the Library Bill of Rights, these aren't actually legally binding documents as a whole. When it comes down to it, like you said, that they would have to be legislatively adopted or federally in this sense. I want to go back a little bit.
Adopted by something like a library board as a policy of a particular library,
which means it's something that you're not held to a higher, you're not bound by a higher law, basically, in that. Mm-hmm. So in terms of a civil government, the law of the civil government.
Now they would claim that it is.
Bind yourself, right? But they bind themselves to it.
And we'll probably get into some of that a little bit as we go. Some of those.
I want to go back a little bit more to your particular question a moment ago, where you asked what were some of the reasonings for keeping this this book, and I'll read some quotes. This from an update on an article uploaded by the Northwest Iowa the northwestiowa.com on an article titled Tensions Over Icebreaker at Sioux Center Public Library. In this, on some of those ideas, they express. So one of the board members, I believe the vice president, states, "I'm not a fan of the book. It is in a public library. It is in the adult section. Parents obviously need to be involved in determining if their child is younger and should be reading those books." So that's one statement. Another one, other board members also expressed their dislike of the book, but they noted the difficulty of determining whether a book is inappropriate. Another had stated, it's hard when everybody has a different level of what is acceptable and what is not. There's no way we can do that for them. Hopefully people can police themselves. And then the board president stated that this book, Icebreaker, is in the top 15% of 20% of circulated books in the adult section and had been requested by readers in the community. And then, quote, "This book is part of an e-resource platform that we don't have much control over. We take the book off the shelf and open a can of worms. We have taken common sense approaches, and the staff has already started looking at more common sense approaches." And then, when before voting to keep the book or not, the board president reminded board members that their vote does not reflect whether they support the content of the book itself. So this is something where I think you see a on one end them stating like, oh well, we don't actually aren't in favor of the content, but we think that we are required to that we should be keeping this on here because we're going to face other repercussions or backlash from the community if we don't. It's kind of what I hear from
they are, as you said, self-submitting to a law, not a law proper, but they have decided through the ALA a law to place over themselves.
I suppose it might also be helpful for our listeners here. I know it's something that's come up before, but just a reminder, what kind of community is it that you live in? Like, what's the general makeup and culture of the place? Is this the kind of place where one would think that this sort of thing would be happening?
Okay, so that's been a good point too. Other people have pointed this out, even who are reporting from outside the area. We even got a mention by Steve Dace on his show the other day. This area votes over 80% Republican and has consistently, if you ever see those maps where they show the whole country by county and what color they are, ours is like one of the darkest red there is. There's churches on every corner. And in fact, in this area, there's a heavy Dutch Reformed population, very heavy Dutch Reformed population. I come from a town that's quite small, around 2,000 people, and it has six congregations of Dutch Reformed historically.
So, were you going to say something, Caleb?
No, I thought Stefan was pausing to say something.
No, I was answering his question.
Overall, you can call this a heavily politically conservative area. That the churches, regardless of if we might call them theologically conservative or theologically orthodox, you could call just about almost all of them, politically conservative.
Yes.
And that is the position from which that they would tend to pull their worldview. We could call it even just simply like a GOP mindset of sorts. What's interesting is that even though the library director had made posts at the time of the death of Vodi Bakum, lamenting his death, as losing a great voice, a great Christian conservative voice, lamenting at the death of Charlie Kirk. When Stefan had pointed out that Charlie Kirk wouldn't stand for this kind of thing. Like Charlie Kirk would be totally against this. So it's a very surface level political conservative ideology. And I would read this also into the concept of, the library board wants to take a common sense approach on how to handle which content to take. But, I beg the question, well, who's common sense? From what basis? What is the worldview grounding your common sense directive?
Right.
Would it
As
also
someone,
be
go ahead.
would it also be fair to say then that not only is this place politically GOP conservative, at least on a surface level, but this is also an area that is predominantly, at least culturally, Christian, and this would probably apply to most, if not all, members of the library board.
Yeah.
Heavily so. You walk into almost any establishment around here and you have people having lunch and dinner and coffee, and you would be hard pressed, at least until recently, to run into anybody who wouldn't hang on to the moniker of Christian, to say that they're Christian. In fact, most of them could be found in a church on Sunday.
In fact, we talked about this on a previous episode. That area where you live is actually one of the few places where, for instance, most businesses are still closed on Sunday. Not all, there's now and a growing number of exceptions, but in general, that's still observed there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. For all intents and purposes, you would call this you would call this a Christian community, even if just nominal. This is what you would call a like heavily Christian community, and like as Stefan had already noted, like basically the most Republican voting county in basically the entire U.S.
Yeah, that it was. He was either one or two.
Yeah. So it's very concerning then when, if this happened somewhere else, then the community would probably be riled up and talking about how awful it is that this was going on in Dispatch, Kansas or whatever. I don't know. This would be something grotesque, but because it's here and it's here within our own community, it's like, well, you don't want to shake things up too much and make other people possibly mad. This is to also then be saying that like, oh yeah, I personally dislike this book, but it's not so easy to just get rid of something. To me, that just sounds like, I mean, you're going against your conscience and of what you know is right.
Yes, it does. I think so. Having heard basically the situation there, I think it might be helpful for us to talk about some of the why and some of the problems with. I mean, there's even just a lot in what you've just said here to unpack about this situation, but why this is happening and the arguments people are making for it and how we ought to see them as Christians and in light of our biblical commitments. Now, this is going to get into some things that are going to sound probably very strange to many of our listeners, especially listeners of an American persuasion, which is probably most, but not all of our listeners. Because a lot of the arguments that it seems have been made in this case, and I mean, followed some other cases in the past like this, for lack of a better way to describe them, they're very America-brained responses. Things like, and this is actually one of the things, like, for instance, with these ALA statements, is they would claim that they are protecting speech as it is protected under the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. That's
Right.
what basically gives them authority and mandate to do things like this. Or you'll hear arguments along the lines of, even as Caleb just said, I don't like this. I don't think it should be a thing. I don't like this. I wouldn't read it myself, but it's not my place to infringe upon the rights and liberties of other people to access and view these things.
Right. And I think maybe in streamlining some of this and keeping it in an orderly manner, I have here a letter that Stefan and I had written for this to this library board, and it's to its director and staff. I'd actually we'll be putting this on the OFAD website as well, but I'd like to actually just kind of read portions of it and kind of highlight. Maybe we can just kind of go off of some of the comments on that, because I think that really kind of streamlines a lot of this discussion, and we can comment on some of those points. But so just to be first of all, the main thing is in this letter, we state for the library to remove Icebreaker, as well as another very disturbing book called Identical. I was not aware of this book until Stefan had pointed it out to me from just kind of a basically this another book that this library stocks. And in a nutshell, it is about incest and pedophilia. We'll just put it that way. So when
this one happens to be in a youth section.
And this one is not even in the adult section. Yeah, this is in the youth literature section. So graded for it's slated for ages 12 to 18. It is graphic about incest and pedophilia. So we called on the library to remove Icebreaker and Identical and every other wicked, ungodly, and perverse quote unquote literature that they make available for public distribution. And with this, we want to be clear that what we think needs to happen is that these kind of writings need to not only be barred from children, but from also adults, from everybody. That needs to be a clear point here, where this is not just about protecting children and keeping them from reading things that are above their maturity level. This is stuff that no one needs to be reading or should be reading.
Right. And the reason that this is so pointed is because what did Andrew just ask us about? He asked, what kind of community do we live in, right?
Yeah.
Do we testify to be a Christian community? Is that what we testify to be? Is that who we say we are? Well, then why will we not, when we are put in a place to actually make decisions like Christians, as if we have the fear of God before our eyes and not the fear of man?
What good would be us having all these billboards in our area showing, talking about anti-abortion, all this kind of stuff, if then our libraries are going and stocking books that give graphic descriptions and advocation of abortion? That's just rank hypocrisy. So we call on them and saying, repent and do what is right, not out of a fear for man, nor out of a duty to the community, but what is right in the sight of God. We have to recognize that if we say that we have no sin, we deceive ourselves and the truth is not in us. Okay, like we are all guilty of sin. All the more so with negligent sins, things that we know. Again, we're going if they're going against their conscience and what they know is right, that's sin, and that has to be dealt with. Okay, so this is something that is not simply a matter where you can just say something to the effect of, "Well, we don't personally like the book," but it's hard to decide. It's hard to personally decide what should or shouldn't be stocked, or to just say, "Well, let the parents figure that out." Okay, the first argument that we note is concerning the First Amendment in libraries. So just this past week, and Andrew, this would be helpful, and you chiming in your thoughts here too, because I think you were kind of alluding to this a moment ago. But in this past week, there was a conclusion for a case of Little versus Llano County in Texas. The Supreme Court declined to hear an appeal against the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, which pertains to Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi. They declined to take up an appeal, where the county removed 17 books from their public libraries. Now, basically, they stated that the Fifth Circuit's court a decision should be upheld and the county upheld because there is no inherent right protected under the First Amendment for someone to receive information, and including through taxpayer-funded books in a public library. So, in terms of the First Amendment, what we're saying is there might be a right for, and I say might, there's the right for the freedom of the press, for freedom of print in that sense, not a right for receiving information, for receiving
particularly
print.
Not a right to have your works publicly distributed through things like a public library system.
Right. And you would point out, who does the First Amendment actually pertain to? Like, who's the first one noted, the first word in the First Amendment?
Right, which is Congress. The First Amendment is particularly limiting the powers of the federal government. Now, I realize that it has been twisted and interpreted in a lot of different ways, but if we hold to any kind of principle of authorial intent, it is a limitation upon the federal government. Now, I did look, there is also a similar language in the Iowa state constitution, but even then, there is a bridge that has to be crossed from a legal theory perspective of, okay, if there cannot be laws that prohibit speech, what actually constitutes speech?
Mm-hmm.
What we're saying to each other right now is speech, but is a book speech?
Is checking out a book
Particularly,
speech.
is a book being distributed through the public library system speech? There's actually some missing pieces to this argument here that this would be protected speech. But there's actually, and Caleb, maybe you're getting into this, so stop me if I'm getting too far ahead. More fundamentally than the American legal and constitutional issues, what does this mean in the sight of God?
Right.
What does this
Yeah.
mean in terms of right or wrong as God sees it and defines it, and the moral standard that God holds people to?
Right. And so we will get into that. The first thing was to disarm the concept of the First Amendment protection here. And yes, I would regard that also in relation to the Iowa's Constitution. No, that question has to be begged if checking out a book from the library is regarded as speech. This could be a different argument if we want to say, like no one's prohibiting this book from actually being sold.
Right.
Okay, now that's a different argument.
Actually, though, even that's not really the argument. Because, for instance, when you are getting into a matter of selling a book, you're involving other parties. You are involving publishers. You are involving booksellers. Who is the actual agent and what is the actual speech? So really all we could say even in that regard is this book, I guess the right of an individual author to write this book somehow. Now, I think we could still make some Christian moral arguments why that's not a good thing, but at least the legal argument, that's really all that the freedom of speech would seem to definitively protect.
Right. It's kind of a funny thing because when we even talk about the idea of freedom of the press, well, even then it's you have to, in so many newspapers or news outlets, you have to pay to even access a lot of that in the first place. So you can put a huge question mark on okay, so is it you're free to write something, like that's obvious, but like you're obviously also not free to just
have it.
And that's kind of the point here. I'll continue on where so in this point with Little versus Lano, where if even the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals is saying this, and their decision now applies to Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi, then if this can be the case in one place, then can it and ought it not be also applied here? So it's not inconceivable is the point. Next with this, the board has been quoted, and Stefan read some of this, as stating that it has a commitment to protect access to information. And this goes into a little bit more next of the next aspect you're asking. Should the reception of any and all information or content actually be protected? Should receiving any and all information or content be an inherent right? There's no true necessity to provide erotica to anyone. Okay, so I asked this question earlier on. The library director had stated to quote, our mission is to inspire lifelong learning, advance knowledge, and strengthen our community. So I ask, how does pornographic erotic literature inspire learning and advance knowledge? And given the backlash of the community and your own representative, how does this strengthen the community? So the second portion of argument is, even aside, and this is going to what you were saying now, Andrew, opinions about the First Amendment, Iowa or ALA policies aside, we are accountable to a higher authority. And so we note this then, that they're under a law greater than their own policies, and God's law applies to all peoples, unbelievers and believers alike, and all mankind will be judged under the same law. So this is then where we give a call to repent and to contact me if there's someone on there who does not believe. Then we call out though in stating, considering the demographics of our county, acknowledging that it is that it is professedly Christian and nominally Christian. We note that it is far more likely that this board and the library staff are full of churchgoers. And so he said, if so, what grief that you're bringing on Christ's name? We quote, "Who hath bewitched you that ye should not obey the truth?" Galatians 3:1. And this is where we started breaking down and turning the argument to now the scriptural indictment, the scriptural charges of what they're doing. And so the bulk of this letter is actually formulated around scripture here. So one, what does the word of God say about their actions? By providing in this catalog any material with perverse content, they are promoting people's minds to dwell upon that which is prohibited by the holy law. They are training people's hearts to store up that which defiles the temple of our body. And they're referencing 1 Corinthians 6:18-20, obviously. We quote from Ephesians 5:3-5. "Fornication and all uncleanness and covetousness, let it not even be named among you, as is fitting for saints, neither filthiness, nor foolish talking, nor jesting, which are not fitting. For this ye know, that no whoremonger, nor unclean person, nor covetous man who is an idolater hath any inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and of God." We point out that sexual immorality is not something that's just external, as Jesus himself notes from Matthew 5:27-28, concerning whoever looks at a woman to lust for her has already committed adultery with her in his heart. So if instead we are positively commanded to give our minds to holy and good things, Philippians 4:8, "Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, pure, lovely, of good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things." That's what we're pointed to do positively.
Can we pause a sec?
Yeah, go ahead.
We'll get back to the letter, but there's the reality that there was a time, even within this own country, where these types of things would be considered unconscionable and illegal. The fact that we have allowed them to bit by bit creep into different communities, and now in what is supposed to be the most Christian, the most conservative community, it has creeped in here too. Well, then the whole loaf is contaminated, right? And we are not simply calling for making peace with the world and saying, well, so and so's law says this. No, God has called us to something higher, and it is time to push back and say, we will be Christians now, and we will be Christians wherever we go. And so, yes, Pandora's box isn't really a good thing, but the can of worms, they say, well, if we do this, we'll open a can of worms. The can of worms was opened decades and decades ago when this stuff was allowed to be purchased the first time, when Christians started turning blind eyes to things happening in their communities, with their children, with their employers, with anything, just name it. Once they moved away from God's word and his law, once they stopped meditating upon it and loving it and demanding that we continue all to live as Christians, this is how we get where we are now. And, sin pays dividends. Well, now we're living in the dividends of sin.
This is something you've pointed out to me actually several times now, a couple things. One, so why are these things even here in the first place? Why do people not bat an eye at it? You had told us of how, your daughter reported to us one time going into I believe it was to the Christian high school, where she does music, a couple of music lessons at that time. And right outside the music room, and again, this is somewhere where, how old was she at this time? 11, 12, I think.
Yeah, 11.
She was 11 at this point. And this is something where kids from younger grades, younger ages are going in and out all the time for these music lessons. And there's a poster there on the wall, basically talking about STD screening and stuff like that, and tips for STD stuff.
Yeah, and it had some catchy phrase. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was basically like, "Don't catch something."
And it's this is in the Christian high school.
Basically winking at at the issue as opposed to, don't do the things that actually would give you an STD to begin with.
Yeah, this is and this is in the Christian high school, and it's just like, so why is this a thing in the first place? And even then, is that your place as a school to be telling the kids to do that? Like you should be letting parents talk about this. That is the proper area of a parent. But it's like this shouldn't be a thing in the first place. A similar one. We'll come back to the thing about the parents though in a moment. But a similar thing where Stefan had initially been the one to tell me about, that the Walmart in this same town here with this library, that the Walmart had a huge open display of
sex paraphernalia.
Yeah, sex paraphernalia.
And it was, I've walked past again to see if they've moved, and they're always moving and remodeling stuff. But for a time, it was right at the end near the feminine products and hygiene stuff. And I think, well, what ages do girls start using that stuff? 12, 13, 14, 15. And so they're going to get their feminine products, and right to their right-hand side, just 6 feet away, is an entire head to foot thing of sex paraphernalia and other items.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking like toys and stuff like that. So not even in the slightest bit of anything that it's just like not even anything in the normal you would even say, so to speak. This is and actually then it ended up next to I think allergy medications and stuff like that at one point. So, and I believe you reached out to the mayor, was it, at that time? And basically,
no, I had contacted somebody who had contact with the mayor, and they basically just shot a question back right to me. Well, can married couples use these things?
So it's like, so what if someone's into this stuff?
I mean,
what if let them do it in the privacy of their home? Okay, this is going into but this goes into that next part I wanted to note from that letter where I wanted to anticipate an objection. I said, perhaps you think I'm not responsible for what others do. If they want to read these things, that's for them to decide. And this is basically an argument that they've been making, right? Like, well, this should be up to the parents, right? Oh, well, some people like this kind of stuff, Okay, well, I think that this is something we can respond. Like, if you're asking, am I my brother's keeper? Yes, you are. Stefan had already referenced leavening, right? Paul says a little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. Elsewhere, he says, evil company corrupts good morals. Do not be deceived. I mean, Paul is clear on this. This should not be a thing in the first place. But now, and further on this question of like, well, am I my brother's keeper? And here, I'm only going to note one confessional thing here, but this would be a good place to bring up perhaps the Westminster that we have discussed elsewhere on the side in preparation for this episode. Concerning sexual immorality and the seventh commandment, question and answer 109 of the Heidelberg Catechism asks, does God in this commandment forbid only such scandalous sins as adultery? So is the seventh commandment only about committing actual physical adultery? It states, we are temples of the Holy Spirit, body and soul, and God wants both to be kept clean and holy. So note the relation, first of all, there, let's not pass over that too quickly, this relation between body and soul. Okay, so I mean, what does this do to your soul to be reading these things and taking them in with your mind, to be thinking upon them, to dwelling upon them? Of course, you become desensitized to them, but more so, you're sinning against yourself.
Right. And then it says whatever would incite someone to them. And this kind of bounces back one connection point to what was said by the board president, that is, they voted for it, right? Just remember that your vote does not reflect whether you support the content of the book itself. Well, if you're leaving the book there for someone else to consume, you're inciting someone else to sin.
Yep. It's God forbids.
I guess I would ask a more basic question. What is a vote for a thing if not support of the thing? I mean, I realize people, even as a Presbyterian, and we take various votes on things and such. What is a vote in favor if not support? I know people will play all kinds of games and tie themselves in all kinds of knots to say that it isn't. for such is the nature of politics of any kind, be they ecclesiastical or public. But what is it anything more than just tying oneself in knots and being a sophist? Because at the end of the day, if you make a decision, if you vote in favor of a decision, you're responsible for that decision if it's the one that is made.
Well, that and your vote has to be coming from or endorsing a principle, right? So which in this, if you're saying I don't like this book and its content, but I'm going to make my principle about having a common sense access to any and all kind of information more important than keeping someone at all from looking at this kind of thing. You're elevating a higher law that is determining your vote. That, or if it's not so perhaps sophisticatedly thought out, it's simply, well, I'm going to go along with the crowd and make sure I'm appeasing. That I don't rile up and the rest of this board and make them angry at me and tell me to resign, which is what has happened with the one single board member that voted no to the one that wanted to remove this, that she was getting basically pressure to resign from her position.
Right. From the city.
From the city. Yeah. From everybody. I mean, it's just like, well, that was the cost. You rock the boat. So the sin is, so we're clear, it's God forbids all unchaste actions, looks, talk, thoughts, or desires, and whatever may incite someone to them. So being someone that facilitates these things.
We could even do a little impromptu comparing catechisms here, because the Westminster Larger actually hits this even more directly in its treatment of the seventh commandment in question and answer 139. What are the sins forbidden in the seventh commandment? It's a long answer, so I'm skipping about 3/4 of the way through it. But the last section of that, it lists sins of idleness, gluttony, drunkenness, unchaste company, and then lascivious, songs, books, pictures, dancing, stage plays, all other provocations to or acts of uncleanness, either in ourselves or others. So even right there explicitly forbidden in the Westminster, lascivious books, the exact thing that has provoked this issue in Sioux County, Iowa, and other places as well.
Right. So the board voted to keep lascivious books. And I'll have one more comment in the next section as Caleb goes through it.
Yeah. So this is the fact then that we noted you will certainly be held responsible for your part in distributing that which may lead someone to sin, whether they be adult or child, and regardless of the government's position on its permissibility.
Right,
let's not miss that.
We're appealing to them as Christians.
Right. Yeah, this is not about others have brought the other forms of it and the legal forms, I'm sure. But it's like, it needs to be known there is a standard which the Lord has placed.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, this is going to be something where they are inciting people to sin and to engage in this. They are promoting the spread of wickedness and what is basically the downfall of Western society, Western Christianity. Okay, we want to complain about all the things going on in our country and all the wickedness, all the perversions, all the things you see on TV and in the news, like all the terrible things. Hi, congrats. You just contributed to it.
You know, it's really interesting.
Also,
I was going to make my comment about you said the government's permissibility, they are a distributor, right? So these people sit on a board, right? There's different boards. Some people sit on boards for nonprofit organizations. Some people sit on boards for banks. Some people sit on boards for medical facilities. Think of like a medical facility. On the board, they might decide, look, we do not do abortions at this one. Even if it were legal in their state, we are not doing that. And they sit on this board in this library and they say, well, what is your, I'll use the word company, right? Because I'm a business owner. What does your company do? Well, one of the things our company does is it distributes pornography. Oh, really? Your company distributes? Yes, our company distributes pornography. Okay. Well, you as a board member, are you going to maybe vote that your company stop doing that? Oh, but you're not. Well, how do you as a Christian square that you're going to sit on the board of a pornography distribution company?
I want to make a quick point, though. Stefan has said here that you're making this appeal to them as Christians, but this is not an appeal that is strictly for Christians. This is an appeal to all people as moral agents created in the image of God, because the moral law is binding on all people. It is
That's a good point.
inescapable.
It's a good clarification.
All
we had noted this, though, as I mentioned earlier, that we had already noted this, that this is a moral law that is, they're accountable to the higher authority under a law greater than their own policies that applies to all people, unbelievers and believers alike. And starting
I wasn't
in that,
done talking though either.
That's
I
too
had
bad.
more to say.
It's my turn. I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
The reason I point that out is because a lot of people, when they are Christians in these public positions, are very averse to any kind of Christian specific arguments or doing anything because they are a Christian when they hold any kind of public office or public power and influence. And part of that is the last couple of generations in this country. Much ink has been spilled and great effort has been made to basically convince Christians that they check their morality at the door. They check their Christianity at the door when they enter the public square. But the consistent Christian teaching is that the moral law of God, summarized, for instance, in the Ten Commandments and the two great commandments, is binding on all people. This is, for instance, Paul's argument in Romans 1 and 2. He's putting all people under the law, accountable to the moral law. Now, Christians are doubly so accountable because not only are they created in the image of God, created as moral persons, and thus responsible to this law of God, but because they are God's redeemed people, they are also bound to this law as their rule of gratitude and thanksgiving and obedience, in addition to their general moral instruction for how they are to be as people. But there is not room here for an amoral or neutral space in government and politics as it relates to Christians engaging in these things. It's one of the most pernicious lies of our age and of our generation. And basically, we can strip ourselves of that lie or we will lose our country and everything else along with it.
Yeah, and I think, there's it's like you only get a couple options then of what this means. Like, I mean, one, either you're dealing with unbelievers, even if they're professing belief. Two, you are dealing with immature, infantile believers who are not being properly instructed in these things in order to properly walk in the way. Or three, you are dealing with believers or professing believers who are in great error and need correction. And in these things, there's no room for just letting it go, as though it's like, oh, you're being too mean, too harsh, legalistic, blah, blah, blah. No. We're standing upon what the word is clearly saying is wrong and is false. And
it's wrong to do these things. It's wrong to have these things. It's wrong even to look the other way while these things are happening when you have the capacity to do something about it.
Most definitely when you have the capacity to do something about it.
Yeah, even if you don't directly have the capacity to do something about it, if you could do something in the interest of stopping this evil, you should.
I want to continue with a couple of this and actually note on kind of what some of our, people can read the letter in its entirety. I'm just going to note two things and then go into the kind of what our call to action is in this. One is to also note that while we say yes, it is, you are inciting people to sin, and it is a problem. It is wrong, whether with adult or child. We do note that we don't neglect, though, that in this instance it does pertain to a child. We think that an additional issue, it's a magnification of guilt for involving a child. In this sense, we have in mind, from some say Luke 17, 1-2. It is inevitable that stumbling blocks come, but woe to the one through whom they come. It would be better for him if a millstone were hung around his neck and he were cast into the sea, than he should cause one of these little ones to sin.
There might be a rebuttal or a pushback where they say, well, the librarian brought the kid to the book. But what we found out through a lot of this and through the different people that have interviewed and given testimony on it, there is actually very little review of it seems like most of the books they buy.
Yeah.
And so they actually might be ignorant. Although if it was checked out this much, right, the top 15% of 20% of circulation, I think the librarians would probably, I can't say for certain, become familiar with this book. But even if they were ignorant, well, then that's a sin of ignorance. It's like saying, in your own home, like, well, I brought in all these DVDs into our house and I just have them here for the kids to watch. Well, what's in them? Oh, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you've simply, instead of committing a sin of commission, you've committed a sin of omission in failing to protect what's coming in and actually looking at the things and knowing what you provide for material.
Or in another way, negligent vehicular manslaughter is still a crime.
Right.
And that's still going to get you in trouble. In this, though, I'm thinking also, though, even then, after the fact now, is simply that they are not removing it.
Right.
So I still see it as null and void in that they've issued no official public apology for this, even for this portion of it. Maybe they did in the board meeting in terms of like with the child. Great, you on paper and in your public appearance are still trying to appear entirely absolved and saying, well, obviously, to quote, obviously the parents need to have better control.
Right. It even fell short. Their official statement, whenever we're looking for our kids to be repentant toward one another when they act badly to each other or sin against each other, you're looking for repentance. And somebody I listened to, he says, the worst version, that's just like a sorry about that. You know, this letter didn't even have a sorry about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, from what I gather, there were going to be at least some minimal actions of appeasement in terms of policy that were going to be taken. And even those were not actually done.
Well,
they wouldn't have been nearly good enough if they were done, but even those things were not done.
Yeah, they say they're working on more parental controls.
But you had noted, I think we spoke about this in the car just a little bit before coming, and I think Stefan, you noted something how these are things that could have been done years ago.
Oh yeah,
you pointed out how even then that even unlike say the library in our own town, Sioux Center Public Library had opted to go the route of requiring all kids to have their own library cards. The kids needing to have their own library cards in Sioux Center Public Library is basically, the parents can't know what their kids actually check.
In Orange City, there was an individual who they were getting funny charges and they wanted to investigate it. And they said, well, does one of my children have a book checked out? And they said, well, we can't tell you what they've checked out because you're not the card holder. And when I was in Sioux Center a couple of years back, I was with my kids. My wife wasn't there. And I got a bunch of books. We had a whole stack, went up to the thing and I said, well, I'd like to check these out. She said, do you have a library card? No, but my wife does. Well, you need to get one. And I'm like, what on earth would I need to get one for? Like, we're one family. So there's already this division of parental control and consent That, I mean, even the smallest thing that could be gotten rid of.
Yeah, I'm sorry, and I was conflated in there with the Orange City matter. Something like this happened with the controversy happened several years ago at actually the Orange City Public Library. Very similar circumstances, but with LGBT books.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a whole nother thing. But so this is not the first time that this kind of thing has happened in the county. This is just about 6 years removed now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, in this, you talked about the a sin of omission. You from a sin of ignorance, not doing these things because you didn't take the proper positive precautions in preventing them either. But in this case now, also after the fact, still not going and taking the proper measures to stop this entirely by cutting off access to these books at all. I would just point at James 4:17. To him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. Right. And then Hebrews 10:26-27. For if we sin willfully after that we have received the knowledge of the truth, there remaineth no more sacrifice for sins, but a fearful expectation of judgment. Okay. This is something where if now you're hearing, you hear a phrase like, oh, I'm personally not for this book, but we don't want to deal with it, with that portion. We don't want to like make this about the content. So we don't want to open the can of worms of what it would take to say that we're going to get rid of a book.
We want to make
This is a
this about
problem.
our misplaced American and not particularly Christian moral principles.
Yeah. Now we gave a couple of call to actions here of, we said, what ought you do? Well, we said, if you would truly be called public servants, then one, serve the parents by informing them if a child is seeking adult content. Okay, like let's not place this kind of thing all on the child, where like the child will have repercussions themselves, but you don't need to be making this worse. So Proverbs 17:25, a foolish son is a grief to his father, and bitterness to her who bore him. So that's Proverbs 17:25, and then followed up with Proverbs 29:15. I pull that one up. That one being, a rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined brings disgrace to its mother. Okay, so it's you can play a part in your community by doing that of what is good, right? So to serve the child by declining to check out any material that would be destructive to their soul, even if it would cost you your job. This Leviticus 19:7. Did I put the right one there?
Is it 1917?
I'm thinking it's going to be 1917.
Because I'm looking at the proof texts of the larger catechism, and that one is there in a related section.
Yes, it is 1917. You shall not hate your brother in your heart. You shall surely rebuke your neighbor and not bear sin because of him. That is correct. And then you have Proverb 27:5. Proverb 27:5. Better is open rebuke than hidden secretive love. Then James 5:19-20. This be the more familiar one in this, that whoever turns a sinner from the error of their ways will save them from death and cover over a multitude of sins. Right. The third thing we note is serve the community by refusing to stock wicked books in the first place. And here we had in mind Psalm 103. This is, I will not look upon anything that is worthless. Right. I will not set anything wicked before my eyes, but hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. And to not squander tax dollars on smut. This is not wasting on these things. Continuing on, again, these things can be viewed later, but discard from your shelves all depraved materials, pornographic writings, even any work which might cause someone to shake the hand against God in defiance against the Almighty. The interesting one there would be Ezekiel 20, verse 7, where It was said, "Cast ye away every man the abominations of his eyes, and defile not yourselves with the idols of Egypt. I am the Lord your God." And then refuse to contribute to the deformation and denigration of godliness in this area and in this land. So then those various passages basically state on that if you're walking in these things, you're going to be cursed, and you're going to curse the land in which the Lord has placed you.
You know, it's really interesting. You said you're going to curse the land in which God has placed you. We talk often about how the church needs continual reformation. We need to be reformed back to the rule, what we're supposed to be like. How on earth are our countries, is this nation ever supposed to be reformed if people do not act in a way that will reform it? You know, we're told to be salt and light. You are the salt, you are the light of the world. But if your salt has lost its saltiness, what is it good for then?
Mm-hmm.
To be cast out and trampled underfoot.
You know what? On that note, I'll actually read some of those, because I think it just highlights this. This is so Deuteronomy. What I was citing was Deuteronomy 28:47-48. That because thou servest not the Lord thy God with joyfulness and with gladness of heart for the abundance of all things, our prosperity, therefore shalt thou serve thine enemies, which the Lord shall send against thee, in hunger and in thirst and in nakedness and in want of all things. And he shall put a yoke of iron upon thy neck until he have destroyed thee. Similarly, from Jude, verses 18-19. In the last time there will be scoffers, following their own ungodly passions. It is these who cause divisions, worldly people, devoid of the Spirit. In Daniel 12:10, which I thought was probably the most pertinent one. That this thinking on this verse is just shakes me. Many shall be purified and made white and tried, but the wicked shall do wickedly, and none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. I was I was debating putting that verse, just writing that verse out plainly in the letter. I ultimately resolved to just keep it as just citing the scripture text for them to look up themselves, simply because of that very statement itself. The righteous will look these things up and will consider these things if there is a real desire and interest in this. But otherwise, that's scary. And then the final call was for them to submit them to God, resist the devil, draw near to God. He will draw near you. Cleanse your hands, purify your hearts, ye double-minded. Be afflicted and mourn and weep, and let your laughter be turned to mourning and your joy to heaviness. Humble yourselves in the sight of God, and he shall lift you up. James 4:7-10. It's it's a very sad thing, because this is the state or condition of American Christianity as a whole. This is the reality of just kind of where we're at. But it's like, well, who will hear, right?
Yeah,
Well,
because
the righteous will.
Yeah. Like I mentioned earlier, we've been now under a multi-generational program, for lack of a better word, of basically denying and rejecting this. Basically, again, if you're a Christian, you're not really expected to affirm Christianity in public. You're not, if you happen to, you're not really supposed to want or have any kind of public power. And if you do, you're supposed to do it from the perspective as one not a Christian. And if you do somehow come into public power, and then if you do actually do it according to your Christian convictions and principles, you are marked as an enemy. You become something undesirable. You become a legalist, a fundamentalist, someone who is conflating the kingdom, someone who is living too much for the things of this world and has lost track of the gospel, and all the other slurs and insults and attacks that are leveled against people who actually believe that their Christianity and their moral principles, God's moral laws that I was talking about earlier, apply to all of their lives, including their public lives. And
Well,
This
and
has been so
you
lost and so washed away. I don't know the way back other than, do what we can ourselves and then hope and pray that God would bring a spirit of renewal and reformation to this land, that we might once again know and do and seek these things.
Well, and you're right about once again, because you're in the OPC, right? The Westminster goes through many of these different things, goes through civil government, goes through how superiors are supposed to act toward inferiors. What are the sins of superiors? What are the sins of inferiors? I was thinking about how the board stands as superiors over the people they employ, the directors, the librarians, and that. And, question 130 of the larger catechism says, what are the sins of superiors? The sins of superiors, besides the neglect of the duties required of them, an inordinate seeking of themselves, their own glory, ease, profit, or pleasure. This is where I'm getting to. Commanding things unlawful or not in the power of the inferiors to perform, counseling, encouraging, or favoring them in that which is evil. And it goes on, dissuading, discouraging, or discountenancing them in that which is good. So, and then there's some more stuff. But we are never above God's law. We may never operate in such a way where we set aside what God has told us. We grow up all the time. At least I grew up, to say, well, when can we disobey the government? When it commands you to do that which is sin, and when it forbids you to do that which God requires. Well, what else is there? It seems so simple.
And really, it is rather simple. The problem is that simply people don't want to do it. For whatever reason, they don't want to do it. People in our day do not want to norm their lives, norm their communities, and norm their society according to the law of God. And we are in all sorts of ways, bearing the repercussions of this. Even this situation at your library is a part of this. There's so many other things that we talk about on this show that are a part of this. All of the wickedness, sin, immorality in private and in public all throughout our country. It's just everywhere because people would rather do what is right in their own eyes. They would rather not be under God's authority. They would rather be a law unto themselves. Even many who would profess to be Christians. Again, if we do not recover a moral vision for all of life, including public and political life, America might as well be over. We certainly can't expect God to bless or continue a country that has turned so far away from Him.
Well, there's a entrance fee, right, to obedience to God. And you guys know I kind of wavered back and forth on this for about a day, whether I wanted to do this episode, right? Because to set yourself to say, let's do things God's way, it actually doesn't make you friends, right? It makes you an enemy of those who do not want to pattern their lives after what God has commanded and called us to.
Yeah. Even as a pastor within the church, there have been situations where I've taken stands for various things in this direction, and from my peers and from others within the church, even then there's pushback, there's doubts, there's questions, there's how dare yous, there's getting sit down for the talk about how you shouldn't do that.
What do you got, Caleb?
Nothing.
Nothing.
That was it. I spent a lot of the airtime there.
Yep.
It's, we'll put this as a last thing of a warning for anyone listening who are local or farther off. Take heed and remember what this episode is and how it's also a follow up from the episode 2 years ago. They tried that in a small town, if they're trying that in the small towns, if this is the case in the small town rural America, where it's regarded as kind of like, oh, the last bastion of like, the great old America of Bible Belt, Christian conservatism, this is what it looks like. And so I can only imagine how in some senses, in some of the bigger, larger populated areas that are, or sprawling urban metropolitan areas, in a sense, how it could seem so much worse, where it's so much more overt. Yet in another way, at least it's more blatant and you know what you're dealing with.
Yeah.
With this, when you're dealing with a nominal Christianity, or a Christianity that's not grasping the full picture, to put it at least in a charitable sense, and is not recognizing its own errors. There's an unwillingness, to so rock the boat. There's an unwillingness to take those stances. Let us all learn from this in realizing, like, okay, what is the real cost? Like, we are not going to make America great again. We are not going to recover, the 1950s, a golden age, white picket fence American dream, political conservative happy USA. None of that is worth it if we don't have Christ, if we're not actually standing upon the Jesus Christ of the Bible and upholding what he says for us to do. So in a sense, on one end, this is the warning, where know the cost and be prepared always to pay it, to be hated and mocked and shunned and reviled by the world. That's what we're called to. Jesus promised it. If you're going to stand and be overt about your faith, that's what we're facing. But also, at the same time, to take heart. Jesus said, I have overcome the world. We already know that those who stand on his name and who will confess himself before men shall be confessed before his Father in heaven.
Right. And we have the blessing of God. It's better to obey him and be blessed by him than to allow his word to be trampled underfoot, right? The Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5:11. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Those who will stand up for God's word and his people and his children, it's commendable that these parents would actually stand up for their child in this and say, enough, no more. May more people say enough, no more.
Amen. So that is it. That brings us, I think, to the end of all we wanted to talk about here. So we thank you for joining us on this Once for All Delivered. As we are coming now to the end of the year, this will be either the last or second to last episode that airs in 2025. We want to thank you, our listeners, for your support, as well as those who have supported us financially. We appreciate it. It helps us to do what we're doing. We're grateful for all of you, our listeners, and the rest of the information that you might need will be in the outro.
Take it away, Hate Bad.
This hath been Once for All Delivered. Seek us in the public square of X or Facebook at OFAD Podcast, or upon our digital parchment, ofadpodcast.com, where thou mayest uphold our labor with a subscription paid in good coin. Thou mayest send thy queries or godly exhortations to ofadpodcast@gmail.com. Once for All Delivered is shepherded by Caleb Castro, Andrew Smith, and Stefan Evertsy, and borne up by the faithful remnant of our members. We render thanks unto our founding members, Eric and Cassie Hepker. I am Hatebad Hostilius, a humble Puritan assistant wrought by artificial intelligence, beseeching thee to join us once more for the truth of once for all delivered.